The palace did not tremble because a crown had been stolen. It trembled because a final wish had been found. Behind a locked archive door, Queen Elizabeth's private instruction was opened, and one name stood above every expectation: Catherine. Not as a decoration, not as a supporting figure, but as the woman the late monarch believed carried the future soul of the crown itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at the page as if it had spoken aloud. The room around him seemed to shrink, not because anyone moved, but because everyone understood the weight of what had just been opened. The sealed final instruction, a private royal document written to guide the family after the monarch's death, had been taken from Windsor's protected archive and read in front of the people trusted to guard the crown's most sensitive wishes. And there, in language too careful to dismiss, the Queen had named Catherine as the symbolic guardian of the crown's future legacy, not the ruler, not the legal heir, but the woman she believed could protect the monarchy's moral heart when titles alone were no longer enough. Charles did not speak at first. He placed one hand over his mother's signature, then slowly lifted it, as though even touching the ink carried a warning. Legal succession, the formal order deciding who becomes monarch, had not changed, and everyone in the room knew that mattered. William remained the heir, Charles remained the king, and the institution still followed the law. But this was different. This was not about who wore the crown next. This was about who the late Queen trusted to carry the meaning behind it. That distinction cut deeper than any public announcement could have done, because power can be explained, but trust can only be given. Catherine received the news away from the larger room, and she did not smile. She sat still, her fingers locked together, while the words were repeated with careful restraint. The Queen had chosen her name. The Queen had placed that name above every other senior royal in matters of public confidence, continuity, and emotional duty. Catherine understood the honor, but she also felt the danger. To be chosen by Elizabeth was not simply to be praised, it was to inherit expectation from a woman whose silence had shaped history. Camilla understood the wound before anyone dared name it. The Queen Consort knew the final wish had not lifted her higher in the nation's imagination. It had quietly pointed beyond her, toward the future Queen standing beside William. And when the prince asked to see the original letter himself, the air changed again. Because William did not just want confirmation. He wanted to know why his grandmother had written Catherine's name with such certainty. But the document was only the beginning, because the real shock was not what Elizabeth wrote. It was who had been waiting years to hear it. Every royal name inside that room carried a different wound. Charles saw a mother's judgment. William saw a future suddenly made heavier. Camilla saw a place beside the throne begin to narrow. And Catherine, at the center of it all, felt the unbearable burden of being chosen by a queen who was no longer alive to explain why. The silence after the first document did not calm anyone. It sharpened everything. Charles looked across the room and saw not officials, not advisors, not servants of the crown, but witnesses to a truth he could not easily control. The king had spent a lifetime preparing for duty, yet this moment placed him in a cruel position. He had to honor his mother, while knowing her final preference might cast a long shadow over his own reign. The crown, in plain terms, was more than the jeweled symbol of monarchy. It represented authority, trust, service, and the emotional bond between sovereign and people. And now Elizabeth's last wish suggested that bond would one day rest most safely with Catherine. Catherine did not behave like someone who had won. She behaved like someone who understood the cost. For years, the Princess of Wales had stood at the quiet center of the modern monarchy, disciplined when others were dramatic, restrained when others chased attention, trusted when the institution needed calm. That trust mattered because the monarchy was no longer protected by distance alone. It survived through belief. It survived because the public had to feel that someone inside the palace still understood humility. Catherine had become that figure without demanding it, and that made Elizabeth's choice even more powerful. William watched her closely, and the prince saw what others missed. Catherine was not glowing with pride. She was frightened. Her face carried the shock of a person suddenly handed a burden no speech could soften. William understood that his grandmother had not given Catherine a prize. She had given her responsibility. And responsibility inside that family could feel like honor on the outside, and isolation on the inside. The future king knew that if Catherine accepted this role, she would be praised by some, resented by others, and watched by everyone. Camilla sat apart during the private briefing, and the queen consort's expression changed when one aide carefully said, "Elizabeth chose Catherine." The words landed with quiet force. Camilla understood what they meant. The late monarch had not simply respected Catherine. She had identified her as the safest emotional bridge between the old reign and the one still waiting to come. That kind of trust could not be manufactured by rank. Charles then noticed a second note attached beneath the first document. It was marked only for the Prince and Princess of Wales, and his silence deepened. The family finally understood that this choice had roots. It had history. It had a beginning no one had dared revisit. To understand why Elizabeth placed such faith in Catherine, the palace had to return to the day that quietly changed everything. The turning point was not a banquet, a coronation rehearsal, or a state ceremony. It was a quiet moment inside St. George's Chapel after a family memorial, when Queen Elizabeth watched Catherine do something no advisor had requested and no camera fully captured. In that instant, the monarch saw not performance, but instinct, and that instinct became the seed of her final wish. The memory returned like a sealed door opening. St. George's Chapel, a royal church inside Windsor Castle, where many of the family's most solemn services take place, had been heavy with grief after Prince Philip's private memorial gathering. Philip had been more than a husband to the Queen. He had been the one person who understood the cost of duty before the world turned it into ceremony. Elizabeth carried that loss with quiet control. But control did not mean absence of pain. Everyone around her knew the day mattered, because it was not only about mourning a man. It was about watching who remained steady when the family's oldest pillar was gone. Catherine noticed what others missed. A young page boy, shaken by the pressure of the service, struggled to hold himself together, while senior royals moved back into position. Catherine stepped away from rank, away from expectation, and quietly comforted him before returning to William's side. No announcement followed. No grand praise came. The princess simply chose compassion before position, and that choice pierced the silence around Elizabeth. The Queen saw it. More than that, she understood it. In a family trained to move by order, Catherine had moved by instinct. Elizabeth later told a trusted aide, through a documented private account preserved in her personal papers, that Catherine understood service without needing to announce it. The words did not leave the file. They did not become a speech. They stayed hidden, gathering meaning over time. That mattered because the Queen was not easily impressed by gestures. She had spent a lifetime watching people perform loyalty, polish ambition, and disguise hunger as duty. Catherine felt different. Her restraint did not look weak. It looked necessary. William remembered the chapel moment with sadness, because Catherine never mentioned it afterward. The prince knew what that silence meant. She had not done it for approval. She had not done it to be seen. And when the final instruction revealed Elizabeth had begun keeping personal observations of Catherine after that day, William felt the full force of his grandmother's judgment. Those notes compared Catherine's calm with the growing noise around the palace, making her appear not ambitious, but essential. Camilla heard about the chapel incident later, and the Queen Consort's reaction was immediate. She demanded to know why no one had warned her that one quiet act had begun shaping Elizabeth's final decision. The answer was devastating. No one had warned her because no one understood it until the letter was opened. That question leads directly to the confrontation no aide could soften, no secretary could delay, and no palace wall could fully contain. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a door closing. Inside a private sitting room, Camilla faced Catherine without aids, without ceremony, and without the comfort of polite distance. On the table between them lay the Queen's final instruction, its pages calm and merciless, while two women understood that the palace could only have one emotional center. Camilla had asked for the meeting herself. The Queen Consort wanted no secretary softening her words. no advisor turning pain into protocol, and no careful palace language hiding what everyone already knew. Catherine had been placed at the center of something far larger than a family disagreement. Symbolic authority, meaning the power to represent trust, continuity, and emotional leadership without changing the legal line of succession, had gathered around the Princess of Wales. That mattered because the monarchy survived not only through law, but through belief, and belief, once transferred, could be impossible to call back. Catherine entered carefully, but she did not enter weakly. She knew the room held more than hurt feelings. It held the collision between present rank and future trust, between the woman beside Charles now and the woman Elizabeth had quietly chosen for what came next. Camilla watched her with an expression that did not break, yet everything about her seemed tightened by the question she had carried since the chapel story surfaced. She pushed the document across the table, slowly enough to make the movement feel deliberate, and asked whether Catherine had known all along that Elizabeth intended this. Catherine answered with restraint. She said she had known nothing, and the truth of it made the wound worse. Camilla could have fought calculation, she could have confronted ambition, but innocence was harder to accuse. The Queen Consort had expected Elizabeth's final words to strengthen Charles, to wrap his reign in a mother's blessing, to secure his place against doubt and age and public hesitation. Instead, those words had redirected the monarchy's emotional inheritance toward Catherine. Not publicly, not loudly, but with a force no title could cancel. Camilla leaned back, and for a moment, her anger gave way to something more painful. She understood that Catherine had not taken anything by force. She had been trusted into it. That was the betrayal Camilla could not name without sounding cruel. Catherine finally spoke again, quieter than before but stronger in meaning. She said she would not reject the Queen's trust simply to make others comfortable. She would carry it carefully, but she would not pretend it had never been given. Charles was told what happened before the hour ended, and the King's reaction was heavier than anger. He understood then that the conflict had moved beyond papers, beyond archives, beyond palace procedure. It had entered the heart of the family, where no signature could easily repair what Elizabeth's final wish had exposed. And once the king understood that the final wish could not be buried, the question became brutally simple. Who truly controlled its meaning? Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself. It sits in files, signatures, sealed instructions, and the careful memory of those who served the crown for decades. As Charles examined the Queen's final wish, he discovered that Catherine's name was not an emotional accident. It had been protected, witnessed, and preserved with the kind of precision that made denial impossible. Charles wanted a weakness in the paper. He wanted one loose phrase, one uncertain witness, one careful escape that would allow the palace to treat the instruction as sentiment rather than command. But the deeper he looked, the tighter the truth became. Senior advisors explained that Elizabeth's wish had been preserved through private royal channels, meaning trusted family offices, and long-serving palace officials had kept it safe outside public debate. It was tied to ceremonial continuity, not parliamentary succession. Parliamentary succession means the legal order deciding who inherits the throne, and that line remained untouched. Yet ceremonial continuity meant something almost as powerful inside palace walls. Who would protect the symbols, rituals, and emotional meaning that made the monarchy feel alive? The document did not hand Catherine a throne. It handed her a burden wrapped in honor. The Princess of Wales was given moral stewardship over selected crown traditions, including family jewels, public legacy moments, and future royal symbolism. Moral stewardship meant she would help guard the meaning of these traditions, not own them like personal possessions. That distinction mattered because the late Queen had always understood one dangerous truth. Jewels could shine, ceremonies could impress, and titles could command attention. But without trust, all of it became empty theater. Catherine was being placed near the heart of that trust. Charles sat with an old advisor who had served his mother for decades, and the conversation cut deeper than any legal briefing. The advisor did not raise his voice. He simply told the king that Elizabeth had trusted Catherine's steadiness above palace politics. Charles absorbed the words with visible restraint, because they sounded gentle but landed like judgment. His mother had not planned against him, That would have been easier to resent. She had planned beyond him, around the fragility of his reign, around public doubt, around the knowledge that the monarchy's future might need a calmer hand than power itself could provide. William found the sealed schedule later, and the prince understood why his father had gone quiet. The schedule showed that Elizabeth had intended Catherine to receive private briefings long before the public ever understood her importance. These briefings were not ordinary meetings. They were carefully prepared sessions about family memory, ceremonial choices, and the emotional language of the crown. Then William saw the line written beside Catherine's name, "She will carry what others cannot." The words were simple. Their meaning was devastating. Camilla felt the shift before anyone announced it. The queen consort noticed changed tones, delayed answers, and doors opening elsewhere first. The machinery of the palace had begun to move, and she was the first to feel the floor move beneath her. By morning, the consequences were no longer hidden in archive folders. They were moving through corridors, offices, and royal calendars. The first sign of fallout came not through a speech, but through a changed calendar. Meetings were moved, briefings were redirected. Aides who once walked toward Camilla's office now paused before Catherine's door. Nothing had been publicly declared, yet everyone inside the palace could feel it. Elizabeth's final wish had become an invisible command. Catherine did not ask for the shift, but the shift found her anyway. Her name began appearing on planning papers that once moved through older channels, papers tied to future royal ceremonies, legacy events, and family archive decisions. Royal ceremonies, in simple terms, are the formal public traditions that show the monarchy's role in national life, from services of remembrance to major family occasions. Legacy events are moments designed to protect a royal figure's memory for the public and for history. These details mattered because Elizabeth's final wish was no longer just a private sentence in a sealed file. It was now changing who stood near the center when the palace planned how the crown would be remembered. Charles approved the changes, but he did not do it with ease. The king understood that refusal would carry its own danger. If he resisted, it would look as though he was rejecting his mother's final judgment, and that was a wound the monarchy could not afford to show. Yet approval came with suffering. Charles had spent years waiting to lead, only to discover that even in death, Elizabeth's voice still shaped the future more strongly than any order he could give. He signed the revised planning note slowly, then left the pen on the desk as if it had become heavier in his hand. Camilla received her revised schedule before noon, and the queen consort saw the change immediately. Her name had been removed from a private briefing Catherine was now expected to attend. A private briefing means a closed meeting where sensitive royal plans are discussed before any public announcement is made. Camilla read the line twice, then set the paper down with controlled calm. She removed her glasses slowly and told her secretary not to enter for the next 10 minutes. The instruction was quiet, but the pain behind it was not. She had not been shouted down. She had been moved aside by paperwork, and somehow that felt worse. William learned from senior courtiers that several of them had already prepared for this transition, because Elizabeth's instruction had been anticipated. The prince realized then that the palace had not been shocked by the change in the way the family was. Some had expected it. Some had protected it. Catherine was then handed a small archive key connected to the Queen's personal ceremonial notes, and the meaning was impossible to miss. The change was active. Catherine held the key with quiet fear. She understood it was not a trophy. It was proof that Elizabeth's trust had become responsibility. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not carry it alone. So the story turns away from palace machinery and toward the one private conversation that finally gives the moment its human meaning. Away from advisors, titles, and documents, Catherine finally allowed the weight to show. In a closed room with William, she placed the archive key on the table and admitted she did not know whether she was strong enough to carry Elizabeth's final wish. For the first time, the drama became painfully simple. Not power, not rank, but fear. William did not interrupt her. The prince understood that Catherine had spent the entire crisis holding herself together for everyone else, and now the silence gave her no place to hide. No aides stood nearby to soften the moment. No palace secretary waited outside with careful language. This was the first conversation untouched by ceremony. And that mattered, because the final wish had stopped being a document and had become a burden placed between husband and wife. The archive key, a small object tied to the Queen's personal ceremonial notes, now represented access, trust, and responsibility. The note beside it carried even more weight, because Elizabeth's words had turned Catherine from a future queen into the living keeper of a promise. Catherine looked at William and spoke with the honesty she had hidden from everyone else. She said she did not want to become a weapon in someone else's royal rivalry. She did not want Camilla humiliated. She did not want Charles wounded further. And she did not want the public to mistake service for victory. The Princess of Wales understood why the moment mattered. If she accepted Elizabeth's wish the wrong way, it could divide the family. If she rejected it, she would betray the trust of the monarch who had seen something in her long before the world did. William took her hand, and his answer carried the quiet force of someone who knew the cost of inheritance. He told Catherine that Elizabeth chose her because she would never seek the crown for herself. That was the painful truth at the center of it all. The late Queen had not chosen ambition. She had chosen restraint. She had not chosen the loudest voice. She had chosen the person most likely to protect the monarchy without needing to own it. William knew that made Catherine powerful, but it also made her vulnerable, because the family could forgive authority more easily than it could forgive trust. Catherine made her decision slowly. She would accept the final wish, but only as service, never as triumph. She would not use Elizabeth's words to diminish Camilla. She would not let palace factions turn the Queen's trust into a weapon, and William agreed to stand beside her publicly, not to seize attention, but to protect the meaning of what his grandmother had left behind. That private choice changed the temperature of the palace. Catherine was no longer simply reacting to the final wish. She was shaping how it would be carried, and once William stood with her, the family understood that the secret could not remain hidden much longer. When the story reached the public, it no longer belonged only to the family. It belonged to everyone who still believed the crown meant something. The public reaction arrived like a storm over London. By sunrise, one image dominated the national mood. Catherine leaving Windsor with a composed face, William half a step behind her, and the palace gates glittering in cold morning light. No announcement could compete with that single picture. It told Britain that a private royal wish had become a national reckoning. Britain did not receive the story gently. It crashed into morning papers, breakfast broadcasts, online debates, and palace conversations with a force no official statement could soften. Newspapers framed the revelation as Elizabeth's final act of judgment, not against Charles, but in favor of the one woman she believed could carry the monarchy's emotional future. One front page showed Catherine in white, beside the headline, "The Queen's Chosen Guardian." The phrase spread quickly because it said what the palace had tried to explain carefully. Catherine had not inherited the throne. She had inherited trust. Broadcasters tried to separate law from symbolism, but even their careful words carried tension. The crown itself, meaning the legal monarchy and the authority of the sovereign, had not changed hands. Charles remained king. William remained the heir. Yet the moral symbolism of the crown, the deeper public meaning behind duty, continuity, and national confidence, had shifted dramatically. That mattered because people do not only follow royal order on paper, they respond to feeling, they respond to belief. And Elizabeth's final wish had given the public a new emotional center before anyone was prepared to admit it. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered in quiet fascination. Some carried flowers, others held phones, waiting for any sign that Catherine might appear or that William might speak. The moment felt different from celebration and different from scandal. It felt like a nation trying to understand whether it had just witnessed a blessing, a warning, or both. A veteran royal commentator captured the mood on air with one sentence: "This is not a coronation, but it feels like a passing of trust." Those words cut through every panel discussion because they named the ache beneath the spectacle. Charles watched the coverage alone, and the king finally understood what no advisor had been brave enough to say plainly. The public had understood his mother's message. They were not confused by the difference between law and legacy. They knew Elizabeth had not removed him. They knew she had not crowned Catherine in his place. But they also knew the late queen had pointed toward the future with unmistakable care. And that future now wore Catherine's face. Camilla felt the impact in a quieter, colder way. The queen consort saw how quickly sympathy moved toward Catherine, and how carefully the palace avoided denial. William stood closer to his wife than ever, and the prince's support made resistance look smaller by the hour. With the world now watching, the family faced the choice Elizabeth had left behind: resist the verdict, or live inside it. And in the end, the verdict did not come from ceremony, law, or palace strategy. It came from what each person finally chose to accept. The true meaning of Elizabeth's final wish was never that Catherine should rule alone, or stand above the king, or replace the line of succession. It was something more powerful and more painful. The late queen had looked beyond rank and chosen the person she believed could protect the spirit of the crown when everyone else was fighting over its shape. Charles knew the palace had reached the point where silence could no longer protect anyone. The instruction had moved from archive to family, from family to public imagination, and now it had to be accepted before it became something more dangerous. Elizabeth's instruction was formally treated as a guiding royal wish, meaning a deeply respected personal direction from the late monarch that shaped tradition without changing the law. That mattered because the legal line of succession, the official order deciding who becomes king or queen, remained untouched. Charles was still king. William was still heir. But Catherine had become something no act of parliament could easily define. The emotional guardian Elizabeth believed the monarchy would one day need. Charles placed the document back into its folder with a calm that cost him more than anyone in the room could measure. The king did not argue. He did not deny the weight of the words. He said only that his mother always understood duty better than anyone, and the sentence carried both love and surrender. For him, this was not humiliation in the ordinary sense. It was the harder pain of realizing that Elizabeth had seen the future clearly enough to plan around his weaknesses without ever abandoning him. Camilla accepted the verdict with dignity, but the queen consort could not hide the wound completely. She understood at last that Elizabeth's final trust in Catherine was not a rejection of her marriage to Charles. It was a judgment about the crown's future image, and that judgment was sharper because it was not cruel. It simply placed the public's emotional faith where the late monarch believed it would survive. Camilla had gained rank, but Catherine had received trust. Inside a family built on symbols, that difference changed everything. Catherine stood before the archive key one final time and returned it to its case before taking it again. The gesture mattered because it proved she was not grabbing at power. She was choosing the burden with open eyes. William stood beside her in quiet confirmation, and the prince's presence made the meaning complete. This moment would not divide their future. It would strengthen it. Elizabeth's final wish had changed the monarchy forever, because Catherine did not seize power. She received responsibility. By accepting it with humility, she became the living bridge between the queen's reign and the uncertain crown waiting ahead. The story ends with one unmistakable truth. Queen Elizabeth's last wish did not crown Catherine in law, but it crowned her in legacy. And that was the inheritance no one could take away. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.